Greetings. Today we will visit the Spring Mill State Park near Mitchell, Indiana, and learn about the grist mill and sawmill in the Pioneer Village. Before getting started, I would encourage you to subscribe to the Mossy Feet Books YouTube channel for more great content. I also entreat you to visit my website, www.mossyfeetbooks. There you will find sample chapters, podcasts, and a slew of content and links to where you can buy my books. While visiting the website, you can subscribe to it and receive email notifications of when I publish a new book or other content like this video and podcast. You can also subscribe to the Mossy Feet Books YouTube channel to ensure you don't miss any of my content there. This episode is based on my book, Spring Mill State Park. Early pioneers in Indiana founded the village of Spring Mill in 1814. The copious amounts of water that flowed from the local caves encouraged them to build a grist mill using the water to power the mill. In 1817, Hugh Hamer, the mill's owner, built a larger mill on the site. This grist mill was a three-story limestone structure and is the mill that exists in the Pioneer Village today. Since farmers had to bring their grain to the mill for grinding, the mill became a place for neighbors to meet and gossip as the millstones converted their grain into meal and flour. A village developed around the mill, and by 1850, Spring Mill was a bustling community. The mill operated from 1817 until 1892. Steam-powered portable mills replaced the grist mills, and the need for water-powered mills died away. The ownership of the mill came in 1824, brought the addition of a sawmill. This increased the usefulness and revenue of the mill. Two developments brought about the decline of Spring Mill. The railroad bypassed the town due to the steep hills, making it difficult to build a rail line through the town. Steam power rose as a more profitable power source. Steam-powered grist mills and sawmills released the need to locate a mill near a water source. Two rail lines intersected at Mitchell, and Spring Mill went into a decline. By the late 1890s, the population of the village had abandoned it. The buildings and mill, neglected, deteriorated. The state acquired the property in the 1920s. The property was to form a new state park. Many of the structures had deteriorated beyond repair. The water wheel and sawmill had disappeared. Extensive research, renovation, and educated guesses have resulted in the Pioneer Village visitors enjoy today. Many of the structures, including the mill, spring house, nursery schoolhouse, and summer kitchen, still occupy the ground on which they were built. Others have been disassembled and moved in from other locations. During the summer months, interpreter staff the buildings dressed in period costumes working at the task which would have been performed in the 19th century. The mill wheel grinds corn and the sawmill saws logs. Cornmeal ground on the mill is available for purchase inside the mill and at the Spring Mill Inn. The restoration of the village commenced in 1928. The work required an enormous amount of research, educated guesswork, and hours of manual labor. The grist mill was still standing, but it was in ruins. The huge water wheel was lost, though a worker at the site discovered part of it. The Department of Conservation handed the task of recreating the wooden wheel to the Indiana Division of Engineering. The Division of Engineering undertook a painstaking, methodical research project to determine the size, construction, and appearance of the overshot mill wheel beginning in 1931. Park Director Colonel Richard Lieber insisted that the reproduction of the water wheel be authentic. By conducting interviews of area residents that had seen the wheel, comparing mill wheels built in the same era, and using published construction techniques of other water wheels, the division began planning a replacement wheel at Spring Mill. Lawrence Lawyer, a foreman of the CCC camp at Spring Mill, found a section of the old wheel in a pile of drift downstream from the mill. A copy of the 1995 Miller's Guide was found and provided further instruction on the reconstruction of the machinery inside the mill. Historical lore says that this book was the original mill engineer used to build the mill in 1817. From all this data, they could plan and construct the mill wheel. They used a section of the 36-inch diameter, 24-foot-long white oak log to cut at Henryville, Indiana. By counting the annual rings, this tree was determined to be about 195 years old. The engineers used locally sawn, rough-cut lumber from the remainder of the mill. They purchased the hardware from Marion Owen, the last owner-operator of the grist mill at Moscow, Indiana. Mr. Owen had salvaged the hardware when the mill was dismantled in 1913. After fashioning the parts, the workers brought them to a location adjacent to the mill for assembly. They would assemble the wheel in place due to the great weight of the finished wheel. The wheel is 24 feet in diameter, 5 feet wide, and weighs in at about 8,500 pounds when all of the buckets are full. The wheel delivers about 25 horsepower when in operation. The mill flume is 600 feet long and is designed to look like the original wooden flume. The flume is historically correct as possible. The water wheel at Spring Mill is called an overshot water wheel. In this type of grist mill, the stream of water pours into the buckets at the top of the wheel, causing it to turn, supplying power to the axle, which in turn powers the gears and cogs inside the mill. The machinery turns the millstone, which grinds the wheat into flour, into cornmeal. Overshot wheels work best when the water flow across them turns slowly. Lawrence Lawyer, foreman of the CCC camp at Spring Mill from 1931 through 1935, found a section of the original water wheel downstream in a pile of driftwood. He used the wheel to draft blueprints for a new wheel. He built the first reconstruction from white oak. He gave the state engineers his drawings, which they improved and used to build the current reconstructed wheel. Lawyer also constructed all of the machinery inside the mill using native white oak. He also restored the sawmill, of which there were only a few iron pieces, the metal cogs that feed the log into the saw for cutting, some iron shafts, and a wheel. He first saw the mill in 1924 when there was no floor in it. While rebuilding, the various structures 12 to 15 man teams lifted the logs and put them into place. To chink the spaces between the logs, they inserted small rocks into them and plastered over them using a mortar mixture of part lime, 2 parts sand. As time went by, they began adding cement to the mix. This mixture set up fast. The original granite grinding stones that grind the grain were imported from France and wore out in 1962. The replacement stones come from North Carolina. The earliest sawmills in Indiana were either water-powered or pit sawmills. To cut lumber with a pit sawmill, the sawyers first hewed a log square with a broadaxe, then placed the hewn log over a pit. 2 men then sawed planks from the hewn logs using a crosscut saw. One stood at the pit pulling the saw down, while another stood on top pulling the saw up. The men used a chalk line as a guide to keep the planks to the desired thickness. The watermill sawmill was originally constructed in 1824 at the direction of the Montgomery brothers. CCC workers restored the mill in 1932, led by Lawrence Lawyer. Only the cogs that moved the logs out of the wheels and some iron parts remained when the restoration began. A separate undershot flutter water wheel powers the saw, supplying the up and down sawing motion that nails the logs in the lumber. Before powering up the sawmill, the water powering the grist mill is diverted into a smaller one that powers the sawmill. The water wheel supplies power to a flywheel, which in turn transfers that power to a reciprocating blade. A cog and gear system moves the log forward onto the blades, cutting the lumber, which is then stacked nearby. In its heyday, the sawmill could cut 2,500 board feet of lumber in a day. The water-powered sawmill is a great improvement over the pit sawmills in use in the area and remained dominant until the steam-powered sawmills that came later. Portable steam-powered sawmills came into use during the middle part of the 18th century. These saws could use the waste wood as fuel to fire the boiler that powered the saw. With the advent of these saws, loggers could and did log vast quantities of wood. The mill flume carries the water from the dam at the entrance of Hammer Cave and transports it to the water wheel, where it pours over into the grist mill buckets, turning it and providing power to the grist mill and the sawmill. By the time the CCC moved into work here, the long wooden trough had completely rotted away. However, the original limestone pillars remained. The CCC rebuilt the flume in 1931, once again restoring the water flow to the grist mill. The mill office, constructed in 1818 by the Bullitt brothers, is an original structure that was repaired in 1931. The bullets and hammers that were conducted the mill's business in this office. This episode is based on my book, Spring Mill State Park, available at the website www.recipepros.com. The book is part of the 11-foot volume enormously traffic guide series. The books include information about the parks, museums, historic sites, and other day trip destinations across the state. I encourage you to visit the website and describe it. You can find my books locally at the Walnut Street Variety Shop in Batesville,